And I believe we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Trends in Esports panel we've got today. I am your host, Adam Antor. I'm the head coach over at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we have a pretty stacked panel today, and I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, and we will start going by video. We'll hop over to Cody first.
Hey, everybody. My name is Cody Elson. I'm the Esports Director at Northwood. I'm super happy to be here, and thanks for Adam for being such a great moderator.
Oh, thanks. All right, next we'll go with Josh.
Hey guys, I'm Josh Buchanan, the Esports Director at Alvernia University. Prior to coming here about 6 months ago, I was the head coach at Ashland University for about 3 years.
Nice. And
also, shout out for actually helping get the Northwood program started inadvertently. Josh did so.
Hey, same here. I mean, our boss was always like, we got to do what Ashland's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, great. All right, last but not least, let's get to Sean over there.
Hopefully my voice is fine. I can tell my video is really frozen. Blame it on county internet. But I'm the Esports Director at St. Clair College in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. I've been working in esports since 2010, but in collegiate since about 2016, 2017 specifically. And then I also teach in the academic program as well as a full-time faculty member for our esports program.
Nice. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. This is going to be an awesome panel. Like I said, it's titled Trends in Esports. We're going to talk about kind of what we're each seeing in terms of the trends, not only in collegiate, but across the landscape. If anyone watching has any questions, feel free to put them in chat and we'll address them as we go along. I do have some pre-made questions we talked about, but would love to see questions from the audience. So first, let's talk about game titles. Game titles are usually always changing. What titles have you guys specifically seen trending in esports at the professional level, but then also at the collegiate level? What do you see in the next 2 years? Any titles we're going to drop? Any titles we're going to add? Who wants to take the first one?
I'll start. And I guess actually what I'm about to say, I think Sean and Cody are definitely the experts on. But I think this year, especially in collegiate, was the year of Rocket League, big time. Psionic stepped up in a huge way, putting broadcasts on their main channel, supporting collegiate really well, in my opinion. And I think Rocket League, possibly last year, maybe even past League of Legends, is the biggest collegiate title. If not last year, I have a feeling this year Rocket League is going to continue to be that. So I think that's definitely something notable.
Yeah, Rocket League last year, I think, it went from being the third or fourth collegiate title most popular up till I think it would have passed League of Legends as well, because League of Legends actually shrunk last year, total number of teams. And I actually think over time, League of Legends will definitely be stable and do pretty well for a while, but you will start to see a slow decline in number of teams, it seems like, from what we've seen over the last couple of years. The other big title that's going to pop up like crazy this year is going to be Valorant, I think. The biggest problem with Valorant is the fact that a lot of varsity programs are staying away from FPS titles. I think Valorant has maybe just the right amount of fantasy to counteract that. I know a lot of programs that avoided CSGO and will never touch CSGO, but they've convinced their administration to allow them to do Valorant. So I'd say, Rocket League definitely, like if you don't have Rocket League already, I don't know what you're doing. You need to have at least one team, if not several, like, Northwood has maybe 17 teams in the top 18 or something like that, like Northwood. But, you got to try to do that, Rocket League for sure. And then Valorant would be my one to keep an eye on this year if you aren't already.
Nice. Cody.
Yeah, Valorant, that's where we've had our biggest surge of online web submission requests for recruiting has been Valorant this year. It's surpassed every other game by far. And then a lot of VR racing stuff we've had requests for in the last probably 6 months, which has been interesting. We are like one of the largest automotive schools in North America, so we get a lot of automotive. It's not from like working on cars, but like the business side of it. So we have a lot of interest in that for some reason. I mean, you can look at it right now. I'm pretty sure actually Rocket League and Call of Duty had the highest viewership for college right now. Believe it or not, if you actually look at their matches, those two games had the highest peak viewership, I believe, in their championships, and I believe across the board pull in probably the steadiest amount of viewership compared to like Overwatch and League of Legends. I actually consider League of Legends closer to like the third or fourth game in college right now based on growth. I think it's going to get I think, I mean, even if you look at Overwatch, it's really not as dead as it seems. There's like 300 plus teams in some of the bigger leagues this year. So, yeah, I mean, Valorant's going to be the next big dog for sure in college. I mean, it's just coming. I mean, you look at all the colleges and all the recruiting announcements and everything. But, yeah, I'd be paying attention to that. And then the other thing, too, we have a lot of mobile hubs around the world. I think we have 26 different buildings, or 26 buildings in 26 different countries, and lots of mobile requests for games internationally, at Clash of Clans and that type of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff on the rise, and eventually you'll start to see more mobile games pop up in North America for collegiate as well. There's some stuff that's definitely in the pipeline.
That's a great point. I know internationally the most viewed esport right now is PUBG Mobile, and a lot of that is coming from China, India, and some of those Asian countries over there. I think Valorant, fantastic pointing that out. I think that's a good opportunity for those of you who haven't gotten that approved yet. Some ammunition is that is a T-rated game versus the other ones, and that's what inevitably got my supervisors and administration to approve it. It's got some of the fantasy elements, no blood, and it's not as realistic. So definitely positive there.
Yeah, I just wanted to...
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in real quick that I also think Valorant has done a really good job in gender equity. I think you see a lot of professional teams that either have, rosters with multiple genders on their team or sponsoring all-female teams. I think in that game, probably more than a lot of other titles, especially maybe titles like Counter-Strike, like League of Legends. I think that is a big plus. And I think that's probably a natural occurrence of the scene just developing esports in general, but definitely potentially a big plus for adding Valorant and supporting Valorant.
Good point. Cool. Lots to talk about on the esports. We could probably have a whole panel on esports titles, but we'll leave the conversation there at this point. Like I said, if you have any questions in chat, throw them in there. But there has been a huge wave recently, not as big as some of us want, but we've seen some big schools starting to adopt esports and put some money behind it. Specifically from our neck of the woods, Michigan got a donation for the academic side of esports. They've also started putting some titles of esports director. Ohio State built their $1.5 million space. Arizona is now hiring a head coach. Let's talk about this. Like, there's definitely a huge difference in how big schools are approaching esports and how smaller schools have approached esports. What are your guys' thoughts on that trend, and where do you think this is going to go when we start looking 2 to 3 years down the road? Are most of the small schools going to be in a rough place trying to compete with these schools? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go first. I've done a lot of research in this. I don't think Division I public schools care at all about being competitive. And I do not think they will care about being competitive in the space for the next 2 to 3 years in terms of like a top level competition. There's a couple, but the ones that I've met and talked to, and people that have talked to these, it's more so of like a student engagement, student body support piece right now for them, particularly the larger ones in Michigan that are D1 schools that are doing this. And some of the ones, obviously, that I'm aware of outside of Michigan. It's more of like a community involvement, community engagement, getting students involved. And a lot of them are not offering any sort of financial support scholarship-wise. I think there's only a handful of large public institutions that are Division I schools. I know there's a lot of Division II that are. Yeah, and the private sector, where obviously where Northwood's at, and I'd say a lot of NACE schools are, it's a lot more of a incremental driven, new student driven program. Also trying to compete because it's a way to get the small schools' names out there, and when we probably can't in traditional athletics. So that's our biggest push. And obviously, again, the private schools, it's no secret, a lot of them are struggling. We have to bring in new students, and that's part of our program. And part of the reason why our programs exist. And I think that's the big differentiator between us and public schools, where the public schools aren't as much of a recruitment-driven, incremental as private sector is right now.
Yeah, I'll actually throw this out there, too, because I actually had University of Michigan staff, some of them visited our campus, I think, 3 years ago. So they are looking at it, but they don't, like at the time they were telling me they just didn't have the money and they didn't have the interest out of the right departments. So, and we see this even at schools in Canada as well, like the bigger schools, the four-year universities, like, Waterloo or Western or whoever else, what we're seeing is interest out of different departments. Usually for us, it's like recreational departments as opposed to athletic departments. So, you see a big push for intramurals at schools like that. Yesterday, if anybody was in the platform session, he showed an example. It was Nebraska, right? So Nebraska's got a program, esports program, but they're not doing varsity. They're doing intramurals. They're running games like that for their students. I think eventually there will be a shift. I don't know when that will happen. And I think what we'll see along with that is going to be a lot of movement. So a lot of people that are here in this conversation, starting up programs at smaller schools, you're probably going to get scooped up in a couple years or start getting offers from those big schools. I see Cody shaking his head. Maybe he's already got some. He's probably got like 4 or 5 offers already on the go.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to happen in a few years. We'll start to see that. But I just think, smaller schools are a little bit more agile. They're able to move a little bit quicker. Sometimes you might think at your school that things are taking forever. But if you're at a bigger school like Michigan or whoever else, it moves even slower, So my school's we're around 15,000 students. So compared to most schools, we're probably one of the bigger ones. Things move pretty slow. The bigger you get, the slower things get. So that's where we're seeing a lot of movement in the really small schools first. And then also like the big point is what Cody mentioned, like from a recruiting perspective, if you have 2,000 students at your school and you bring in 50, that makes a dramatic impact on the revenues. Whereas if you've got 50,000 students and you bring in 50, that's a drop in the bucket. Like it's negligible. It's a rounding error. So they don't necessarily care. So that tuition coming in from recruits, that's not enough of a motivator for schools like that to launch programs. It's got to come from somewhere else. I think with what we were talking in the previous subject with, I think it was Cody mentioned it, the view on Call of Duty, the viewership on Rocket League last year, we're talking 10 or 20,000 viewers on a weekly basis in those leagues. If you're one of those top teams, I think those types of numbers, if they're sustained year over year for 2 or 3 more years, you're going to start to see big schools realize that, okay, we want those 20,000 views on our program. How do we invest to get there? So I think it's a couple more years out. The small schools are going to dominate for a bit. You've got a short opportunity, a short window of opportunity to build your legacy and strengthen yourselves and put yourselves in that Division I esports conversation. You might not be Division I athletics, but you've got a chance right now to solidify yourself as a Division I esports school at least.
Yeah, I think Josh too probably can attest to it, like his experience. He was like one of the original huge news stories at his previous job of like getting on national television, right? That's a huge boost to the school that I doubt Josh's athletic teams at the time probably ever generated that type of coverage. And like us at Northwood too, we've been on national TV 5 times a year for Rocket League, and that's not going to happen with athletics at a Division II level. But Josh, did you ever like get any concrete data of how impactful that was for you guys getting on? It was a Good Morning America, right?
Yeah, I hope so. So just some backstory is that we were the first to offer Fortnite scholarships back before there was an esports scene. Some might say that was kind of dumb at the time for us to do that, but it worked out great. In the end, the Fortnite esports blew up, which was awesome. And yeah, those numbers definitely made a big impact. And again, I think the one thing to note though, and I think larger schools are probably more prepared to work through this, is that lots of notoriety and lots of views doesn't necessarily directly translate to enrollment. There's more, you have to connect the pieces there, right? And you need to have the infrastructure in place to support that. But I do think that is how those big schools are going to find their value. Because like Sean said, those like smaller schools, you bring in 50 students, 30 students, that's awesome. That's a huge portion of your enrollment, maybe 2% to maybe even up to 5-10% of your enrollment, depending on the size of your school. But I don't think any of the large schools have really figured out the revenue model that's perfect. I don't think anyone has mastered this yet. So that's something I am really looking forward to hopefully helping develop, but ideally getting up to just watch as well as that develops, because there's lots of potential revenue streams. But I think we all also see this kind of, we've seen this so many times where someone hypes up all of the money in esports and how much money there is and like tries to pitch it as something maybe larger than it actually is right now. And that's something that I'm personally a little concerned about, is that you'll see, people selling esports as this thing that will instantly make a school a ton of money, when it doesn't work that way. You have to put in the resources. You have to put in the right work. You have to bring in the right people that can either generate that notoriety, and then as I think Sean said, that year over year kind of consistency in a program that will build that legacy and continue to generate revenue on a consistent basis. Like for us at Ashland, I think we built a great program. And when we had that Fortnite publicity, it existed for the first year, right? But we weren't getting like $2 million in ad equivalency every year after that, right? It happened the first year and then it went way down, right? You can't. So it's important that schools have reasonable expectations and that you can generate that publicity on a regular basis. And we'll see how that goes. I'm very interested.
Yeah, that's a good point. Talking about those resources into schools and what programs and schools are kind of putting forth when they're starting these programs, I would say that when we first started, and even when I was hired, the average salary of a college coach was $35 or less. Have your guys' thoughts been? Is that an accurate assumption that I've kind of made, or a guesstimate? Where do you guys think that has changed in the last 2 years, and where do you think that's going? I know people are. I get jokes. Oh, you guys are going to get paid like football coaches soon. You just got to wait it out. And I have different expectations, but I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. I know a lot of times when a school's looking at esports, they email us asking questions and looking for advice. And I'd love to hear what you guys are hearing on the ground level from other schools as they're starting programs. And if there's greener pastures ahead for a coach who might only be making $25,000 or even part-time currently.
Yeah, I definitely, like I said before, even the last topic, like we're going to see people start to get scooped up from schools. We've already seen, I mean, your school is an example of coaches starting with you and moving on to other opportunities as well, right? Like there's a few examples of that already where, coaches might start part-time with one school and then go on and get a full-time role somewhere else. Or they might start as an assistant director somewhere and then they'll move on to another school and start a brand new program as like the lead director, right? So that stuff's happening, and I think it's going to happen more and more. I think the other trend you're seeing right now too is a lot more schools are at the point now that they've developed maybe to their second or third year of running a program, they're hiring additional staff. So most programs in North America are still one-man show or one show, right? But eventually we're going to have, esports departments look a lot more similar to an athletics department where you've got a director and you've got several assistant directors that are, each have their own specialization. You've got somebody who's in charge of marketing, somebody who's in charge of streaming, etc. That stuff's coming. Part paid coaches in each game, it's coming as well. I think for me, just to throw in a little bit of a Canadian perspective, I think the difficulty for us is that if we look at our athletics department at St. Clair and at many colleges and universities in Canada, paid coaching, like having a full-time paid coach for an athletics team is very uncommon. Like that doesn't really exist. Our coaches, like our volleyball coach, I think is, he gets a couple $1,000 stipend a year. And he's the head coach. Like it's not his full-time job. So that's the additional hurdle that Canadian schools are going to have to go through is not only convincing their administration to allow them to hire an esports coach, but it's just hiring a coach in the first place because that's never happened before. It was easier for me to convince my administration to hire staff members, and that's why that's the route we went, because we could build value that way. That conversation about hiring coaches is a lot harder one. Like my bosses, when I specifically said eventually we want to hire full-time coaches, he said, what would they even do all day? That was his response, because he doesn't know like what a coach does, because he's like, well, the basketball coach meets with the team for a couple hours a night. That's it. That's all he does. Why do you need somebody who's on like 40 hours a week? It didn't even make sense to him. So all that to say, we're getting there, but it's a process. We need to do a lot of teaching, a lot of educating to our bosses and administration on, esports does take a lot of work and full-time people are required.
Yeah, I think that's happening, and you hit the nail on the head with the education. I think a lot of these programs who we started with 2 years ago thought one full-time person was plenty, and there was no need for any other people. But through the education and through just showing our worth, we've kind of convinced our administration that no, we need more. And then our administrations are talking to other administrators as they're exploring esports. So we're starting to see some movement in the right direction, but it's definitely a process. Josh or Cody, you guys have anything you wanted to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of all over the place standard wise in the industry. It's really hard. I mean, I think we all can agree that a part-time person isn't enough to properly run a program. As long if your roster size is anything over 8 people, part-time's not enough. You need more help. And it's taken me a while too. This is my 3rd year at Northwood, and like I now have a full-time salaried assistant, and then I'll have 5 part-time coaches starting in the fall. So my administration finally got it. Once our roster size got to over 70 people, they're like, okay, this is like getting to like a football team size. We need to start treating it like football with similar amount of coaches and supportive staff. But yeah, I mean, my big like stick up for yourself. I mean, you got to stick up for yourself when you're negotiating for a new contract or a new job. I mean, you know your value, and you know whether it's fair or not. And we've all been through. I've been through that too. It's just a matter of don't. It's hard not to because it's so new, and we're all trying to grow the space. But you got to be able to stick up for yourself. Really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and when you say know your worth, I mean have a revenue. Like an Excel sheet that shows how much revenue you bring into the school and minus the expenses that it costs your program. I'll tell you right now that if you've got a decent size team, you're bringing in a significant amount of money to your school. Mm-hmm. So know that number. Like I can call out the exact number I bring into the school every year after expenses. And that's really valuable in those conversations as well. If you're under athletics, they will quickly try to compare you to other athletic teams, which is the struggle I go through right now. But if you're not under athletics, you also have to create the entire ship. I know a couple of you guys are under student affairs, and some student affairs people have never had to deal with something like this before. So it's a lot of the basic education that has to happen as well.
Yeah, another thing I would just add is that don't let perfect get in the way of great or even good in a lot of these situations. All of our institutions are at totally different places in their growth. Some have declining enrollment, some have growing enrollment. You have to work through that, I think we all want more resources. So as Adam and everyone else said, like show them your worth, have those numbers on hand. But even if you can't get yourself to full-time or you can't get a full-time assistant, any help goes a long way. Graduate assistants I found are awesome. Definitely a good way to go. And then also, I think it's up to us to show these new institutions the value that can come from as they're planning, like putting proper staffing in place. Like, I think it's much easier when a program is being drafted and the financials are being drafted for the first time to plan for that originally than it is to go back and kind of try to fight for those resources after the fact. So when you're talking to your neighbors, I think we all want the industry to grow together. So please definitely be the advocates that we want to see. I see a lot of people on Twitter talking about salaries and talking about full-time, part-time. And I don't think really any of those people are wrong. But I think, and advocating on Twitter is great, but I think the biggest difference you're going to make is when you go out and talk to, in your local community, to those athletic directors, to those presidents, to those administrations, because those are the people who are making those decisions. And I think if you can help them grow, the whole scene will grow along with it.
That's a great point.
There's one piece of advice you can give a new school that comes to you asking, hey, how did you start? What should we do? The very first piece of advice you should give them is hire somebody full-time to run your program. Like that should be number one. That's like the most important piece of a successful program. If you were to compare every program in North America, all 300 or whatever schools there are, compare them all. The successful ones generally have a full-time staffers. The unsuccessful ones generally are the schools that try to tack it on to somebody who's already working in some other job.
Yeah, it's just hard though. The biggest challenge is the community colleges in the United States by far, because like you see the salaries posted for esports, and it's hard because they're compared to like the basketball coach or the soccer coach, which most of the time they're making like $5,000 a year. If you look at it, they're getting a stipend, right, in the United States. So that's where the challenge comes from. Where, I mean, it's esports, and this is not to take from traditional sports, but I mean, you can ask like our coaches here. I spend way more hours a week working on recruiting and coaching and a bunch of other responsibilities than a traditional coach does right now. Honestly, like we all spend like, at least not all of us, but a lot of us are not by choice have to pretty much put in 50, 60 hours a week just because there's so much to do. And there's not really, I hope we get to a place where there's a traditional off season in esports. That'd be nice. But unfortunately, if you're one person full time, there's not much of, an off season right now for you. So I hope we can get to that point.
June through August, let's make it happen.
Good luck.
Yeah. Our Rocket League team has played 8 games already this year.
Your guys' social media doesn't take a break. I'm like, guys, like I slow it down. We do like 2 practices a week that are optional over the summer, but you all are like,
this is the first, it's the only team.
Go.
It's the only team, and it's just because our team is just going crazy. But there's no off season, unfortunately. If Rocket League, we talked about Rocket League earlier. Just be prepared for no off season in Rocket League.
And there probably won't be. Like we're not seeing one come up, especially for the super competitive teams. Some of the lower competitive teams or teams who have issues with burnout, you kind of just have to make your own off season. Like we take the summer off, basically. But that's not realistic for every team and the goals of those players and those programs. So just an option. So Sean talked about how some of these are the trends, the trend of happening after 2 years, a program hires a second person sometimes, oftentimes. What are the other trends you guys are seeing in the programs that have been around for 2-3 years? Including ours. I mean, what have you seen? I know we'll probably touch on spaces. Sean can talk about his spaces. Cody can probably talk about his space. Spectator experience. I don't know, expanding titles. What are the trends and what do coaches who've been running a program for 2 years need to expect? And then also what administrators who are planning to start a program now, what do they need to plan for in 2 years? We'll start with Sean on this one.
I guess we'll go with the space one then because he brought it up. But
it
is one of the trends we're going to see. So anybody follows me on Twitter, whatever, follows our accounts, you'll see we've got a big facility coming. But what's funny, and I tell this to people all the time, like our facility is going to get dwarfed so fast. Ours is about 15,000 square feet starting up. But remember, we started in basically 600 square feet. Like our first facility was 600 square feet with 13 PCs. That's how we started. And it took us, 3 years basically to convince the administration, like we need a lot more space than this, and this is the value you can bring. And they understood that, and we're building it. But what's funny is we're probably within 6 months, there'll be another facility built that will be way bigger than ours and have way more computers and stuff, right? So it's just that's one of the trends you're going to see for sure. I hope this isn't the last facility I build in my lifetime. I think this will be the first big one, and then maybe we'll have to build another one in a couple of years. But I think by that time, there'll be so many other big facilities that we can use as an example to go out and use as I think there's not really a design yet that makes sense, right? We're just making it up as we go. Like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's do this. RGB over here, and oh no, we want natural light, and all this kind of debate that happens on Twitter, right? Like we'll see what happens, and maybe there will be in 10 years, 15 years, here's the best way to build a facility. It'll probably come, but overall the trend is going to be much bigger and much better facilities for esports across North America.
How about Cody? What are you seeing? What are your trends and predictions?
I mean, I agree in the same thing. I mean, we're in the same boat where we're probably going to be 5 times the size that we have right now by hopefully next fall. We have like 45 or 48 computers, and we're not going to obviously have 200 computers. But I think one trend that you're going to start seeing with these spaces, though, is more of like a common area space where multiple students on campus can utilize, not just on the esports team. You're going to see a little bit of a hybrid, and that's kind of what we're doing as well. As we might be we're probably going to end up going to around 13,000 square feet, and I think you'll probably see about 3,000 square feet of that'll be dedicated to like open labs, open areas, collaboration spaces, and that kind of stuff, versus just all being varsity esports all the time. Wow, lights just shut up.
Hey, look at the LEDs, everybody.
Yeah, that's our stage behind me right now. But you're going to start seeing that. And then I also think one thing you'll start seeing is a lot more sponsors getting into the space in terms of like sponsoring the facilities and partnerships. But I mean, Sean kind of hit the nail on the head. I think like if we go to 13,000 square feet like we plan, I mean, I don't think that's even going to be a top 10 size in the country by the time next fall hits.
Yeah, I mean, when we start looking at some of the D1s and how many kids are involved in their esports program, I mean, you can't create a student-centric facility in some of those big schools at 30 computers, 50 computers. So I think that's a good point. I also, just touching on spaces, I know there's a lot of traditional non-endemic brands who are focused on office spaces, office furniture, who are very heavily investing in research around esports and coming up with what they think an esports facility should look like. So be on the lookout for that. I'm in a lot of those conversations because we're the furniture capital of the world here in Grand Rapids. So Steelcase, Herman Miller, all of them. I mean, yeah, I hate walking into these labs and being like, wow, this, like, all I can think of is this is not where we're going to end up. They're computer labs with some fancy LEDs. There needs to be more. So I agree with you. Josh, do you have anything you wanted to talk about in terms of growths of programs, where they're heading?
Yeah, I have two things. I think just adding to the space conversation, I think that might be, I think as more D1s actually adopt and more public universities adopt, I think that'll be a thing that becomes a staple on college campuses. Maybe not 2 or 3 years from now, but I think definitely 5+ years from now, it'll be a thing where, like, if your school didn't have a nice rec center or something like that, I think there'll be a place in a time where if you're a large public institution and you don't have a gaming esports facility, computer lab type place, it's something you don't have, right? It's just like it's a thing that sets you below the rest. So I think that'll definitely come into place very soon. And also just something minor that I've noticed is that I think a lot of programs hit their stride in year 2 and 3 big time. Like at Ashland, our Overwatch team started gold and plat average. Just people who were there to play, try their hardest, see what happens. And then by the time we were entering our 3rd year, our whole team was 4.3 or 4.4K average. And then I know at Aquinas, you guys in that 3rd year hit a big stride in League of Legends, even more so than ever before, right? And going into this year. And I think you see that in a lot of programs. So I don't think that's, I don't think that applies to every program everywhere, but I definitely see programs in year 2 and 3 elevating big time. And I think it's cool to see that we have leaders in the space that are iterating and kind of growing year after year.
Yeah, it's really cool because, I mean, some of us, when we started, we got 1 or 2 good players in that first year. Then we really struggled through the first year trying to Frankenstein monster team together. And now getting into year 2, year 3, we finally have all the pieces. And it's a really exciting place to be in. And then you have places like Cody who just like shows up and they're instantly winning championships. But yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of times when I'm talking to a program that's been around for 2 years, what they're talking about is a new space, either expanding on their current one or adding another one. They talk about spectator experience, some type of competitive environment, and using their old facilities practice or open student area for all of students. Hiring additional people, usually part-time coaches are usually the first step in that, and then sometimes a full-time assistant director. But all of these are things that I'm seeing after 2 to 3 years of programs being on campus. And frankly, we usually outgrow our spaces and then outgrow the expectations we were originally given. I was only given recruitment expectations for the first 2 years, and I hit them. And now my boss is looking at me like, so what do we do now? And I'm like, I got ideas. So yeah, that's good. Any questions in chat? I'm trying to look through here a little bit. What do you guys think it'll take for the D1s to treat esports like their athletic departments? I'm going to lean towards the athletic conferences adopting it, is my question.
I think that's not enough.
I honestly, a lot of athletic directors don't even want to touch it. They laugh at the idea. A lot of the D1s, they also, when they accept, they decide to put it under athletics, it means a lot of money and a lot of expenses with not a lot of return. Most of the D1s that are adopting right now, it's under rec sports, just like Cody said. Most of them are, it's all student engagement. I was interested, the Arizona job did mention competition and recruitment and working with admissions, and I think that was the first D1 big school that I've seen do that. But What are your guys' thoughts on that? I know us personally, our athletic conference just adopted esports, but that was after 7 of our 10 schools already had varsity programs. So it took a lot of like, hey, we're already doing this. What are your guys' thoughts on the D1s treating esports in a competitive manner, most likely under athletics, and timeline? I know Cody said not in the next 2 to 3 years, but do you think that'll ever happen?
I think we will. I think we'll see some in the next 2 to 3 years. But I think what it's going to take is the viewership and the revenue, right? If all of a sudden there's money to be had, then they'll be here, right? The NCAA probably tabled it a couple years ago or a year ago. As soon as the money shows up, they'll be back in the conversation. Like, it's going to happen. I think those are the main ones. The other possibility is if you have 1 or 2 big schools that are that decide to take a gamble and lead the way, then you'll see esports is very much like a let's beat our neighbor type thing. So you saw that with the smaller schools where one school pops up and then around them like 4 or 5 other schools pop up. Michigan's a good example of that. Like, every school in Michigan has a program now. But that's just because, a couple of you started early and then everybody wanted one. I think if there's a couple of big D1 schools, it's possible. I think that's still less likely, but if Michigan starts, Ohio State already has something kind of going, right? So maybe Michigan looks at Ohio State and they're like, okay, well, we lose to them in football all the time. Let's not lose to them in esports. And then, that might happen, right? It's a possibility, but I think the main driver is going to be that viewership and that revenue potential to increase sponsorships.
Yeah, you guys are probably going to hear this, but I think your big, gigantic schools, let's say, from the ones I've talked to, you're more likely to see them hire a League of Legends coach, for example, and build out a League of Legends team before they build out an entire esports program with all the games. So that's where I think you have so obviously we've mentioned Arizona, you have other D1 schools, but that's just such a small fraction of D1 schools in the country, right? Even though they're going into it, that I think that you're not going to see a huge capital investment into an esports program with the director and other stuff like that, right? You're going to see more so they might just go into even like a Rocket League or League of Legends. They might hire somebody to build that team to win and then add games here piece by piece by piece if they're treating it as a marketing goal, not recruitment. Because they don't need it. We're all doing a great job in esports, but they don't need us right now. They don't need us right now, and they haven't figured out a way how they can either make money or why they need esports yet. So until they need us for a certain reason, until TV, deals fall and they're not getting on TV. I mean, look at the Division I schools in Michigan that aren't U of M or Michigan State. They still get on TV pretty regularly, right? Central Michigan, Western, Eastern for their respective sports. So I just don't think you're going to see it until we need it, and I don't think Michigan State, for example, even though hitting 60,000 peak viewers on the Rocket League channel for a college match is credible, I don't think they see 60,000 viewers and go, we need to capture that audience yet. Until the viewership grows in general to 6 figures consistently, or there's some sort of revenue share with the developer, whatever it might be, I just don't think we're going to see it as quick as people think. That's why if you see it, it's going to be more so of a recreational on-campus thing where they're going to hire a full-time director for it, but it's not going to be from a competitive side. It's going to be more so from let's get our students active and involved and create something for them. And you're also going to see more academic programs before you are going to see varsity programs at Division I institutions. That's the big U of M investment was actually for developing a minor in esports, essentially. That's where the majority of the investment they got is going to. So That's where we have to kind of look at. Not saying that we should all want to be wanted by them, in terms of sports to be everywhere, but I just don't realistically see us from a business standpoint, because at the end of the day, we all know colleges are businesses as much as they are educational institutions. I just don't think that they see it right now because the tuition dollar is not as important to a school with 30 to 40,000, 50,000 people in their network.
It's a good point. I think the one dark horse that hasn't been mentioned, and I don't know how many people know much about it, but seeing IMG Learfield get in the space, who is one of the largest licensing companies when it comes to D1s and large institutions, is investing heavily in esports and creating a lot of momentum around Level Next, I believe is their platform. They could have a lot of say, and they could have a lot of money. I believe they just raised some additional capital. So there is an opportunity here where competitive esports at the D1s does get accelerated if there's money on the table.
I certainly hope so, and not to join the negativity camp, but too much. But I do think that when colleges, especially these large D1s, are looking at revenue, they're not looking at revenue next year or revenue 2 or 3 years from now, like maybe some of the privates might be. They're looking at revenue like 10, 20 years down the line. How is this going to be sustainable? Obviously, I hope the groups like IMG Learfield, who are massive in the athletic space, have something planned. But I don't think when a big D1 school, at least the ones I've talked to, are looking at this, they're not thinking, oh, there's $5 million in venture capital, let's do this. Like they're looking like, how does this play into their greater community ecosystem, their revenue models long term? So that's a bit of a concern. We also have some growth, I think, to do in the space that has been talked about at the NACE convention already. But as far as like equity and inclusivity, we have a long way to go. I think you'll see a lot of bigger schools that will shy away from esports when they hear that 90% is played by men. I don't know if that stat's perfectly accurate, so don't quote me on that one. But things like that. There's also, for the average student, computers are expensive. Consoles are even getting more expensive for anyone who's tried to buy a PS5 or something like that nowadays. That's a barrier to entry as well. So I hope that comes, but I think we still have a lot of room to grow and show that value to those schools.
I have one thing to add on this before, because I know we had to do other stuff, but the way you have to think about this is how it was explained to me when I talked to a very powerful athletic director in the country of a huge D1 school, like a top 10 athletic program. They said, okay, so I have the NCAA behind me. NCAA has done this. The NCAA supports it. They're not going to take away football. But if I support esports, Riot Games can go to me and go, we know what we're deciding. We're done with College League of Legends, and then we're not extending our license to all these things anymore. They can't control what's going to happen, and that scares these schools too. It's not like football where you can go start professional football league somewhere. There isn't somebody that owns a patent on football that can shut that league down, right? You have trademarks for the NFL and all this stuff. That's where it gets into. But you have literally one entity that controls a license. It controls and can literally just go whoop and pull the rug out from underneath you. That is a huge difference in esports compared to traditional sports, why it scares them too. And as much as everybody hates the NCAA, if the NCAA somehow did get involved or had a say or an agreement with some of these companies, you would see a large influx of schools getting involved. But you're not going to see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, I think the NCAA would.
It's hard to grasp that, but you literally the developers hold the fate of college esports, whether we want to admit it or not. They do. And they can stop whenever they want. They can ban stuff. They can get rid of it. It's just part of it, unfortunately. It's their IP. It's a total different animal. And I understand why that scares an athletic director who might invest $2, $3, $4 million into a program, and then all of a sudden go, well, college esports isn't a thing anymore. The developers decide they're not doing it, which I don't think that's going to happen, but it could realistically happen. And they know that it's a possibility. And so, like Adam said, they're thinking, or no, I'm sorry, Josh said they're thinking 10 years down the road of issues and not thinking of, okay, we can build a League of Legends for the next 2 years. They're thinking of 10 years down the road, what's it going to look like? They're thinking of the future. And again, it's just
that's a good point.
It's scary, when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it's a good point. My assumption would be that the NCAA would have to have a long-term license of some kind with a developer before they're actually going to adopt it. And I don't think anyone wants to get a long-term license from a video game at this point because we don't know what's it going to look like. But we'll take Jessica's question. I missed it earlier on. Have you found that the flashier chairs and peripherals did not fulfill the expectations you had and so had to change out your chairs peripherals after the fact, whether it is due to strain or whatnot?
I'm happy to take that one for sure.
Do it.
At Ashland, we actually had our chairs sponsored for the first year, which was awesome. Definitely a cool expense saver there. And I don't think gaming chairs are bad, but they're not ergonomic office chairs, in my opinion. I think you'll get into a lot of conversations about this with people having different opinions. But I think chairs that are built for you to sit in them for a long time tend to be better. The gaming chairs aren't again necessarily bad, but I think depending on the company, You might get good quality versus bad quality, so definitely keep that in mind. Do your research. Some will have really good padding that'll last a long time. Some will not. A lot of these gaming chairs might look the same, but they might not all be equal. So like we're building our new facility at Alvernia for this fall, and we actually chose not to go with a gaming style chair, but just some food for thought.
Yeah, one thing I'll throw in there too, because if you're on Twitter, you'll see a lot of people bashing on stuff. You got to remember there's a lot of factors that go into decisions like that. Josh mentioned one of those factors is the price, or if it's going to be sponsored. Like you have to take that into account, right? Of course, all of us want to go out and have a full facility full of Herman Miller chairs, but those are expensive, and nobody can afford those currently. Nobody's getting a sponsorship from them currently. If one of the other racing chair companies comes along and offers you a sponsorship, sometimes you have to take that. And the other factors that you need to weigh out is, as much as, some people will hate that I say this, but our programs are a marketing tool for a lot of our schools. So the looks are important. Flashy RGBs, is it good for your players training? No, but is it good for attracting students to your school? Yes. There's a lot of factors to weigh out there. So I don't think there is a right or wrong. There's not like this is the chair you need to have in your facility. There's gonna be right chairs for some schools, and it's gonna be a totally different chair that's right for somebody else. The one thing I will say, and it's along with what Josh said, I have been in a facility. It was built at the exact same time as ours. We built our facilities at the same time. They went with one company, went with a different one. Their chairs fell apart after year one. Even though they at the beginning, you put them side to side, they probably would have looked almost identical. Theirs fell apart year one, and ours are still going 4 years later. And they're both racing style chairs. So you want to kind of do your due diligence and have a look around and try to see which brands are more trusted, have better reviews, that kind of thing.
Good, awesome. Here's another question from chat. What is the best way for school districts to get on your guys' radars? We have a couple different competitive levels in different games. Where are you guys at? Where are most college coaches at? I'll throw out NCSA and Be Recruited because we talked about that at the recruitment cycle or the recruitment panel, but everyone's on that, so not everyone's using it to recruit, including myself. So we'll go around the circle here. Cody, if you want to go first. Real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't use any of the recruiting platforms. I really dive into recruiting like years on out, and I individually approach students that I select, wherever it may be. And I do reach out directly to a lot of the school districts and schools. Like that is actually a viable thing for me. But the best way to get on our radar is to invite us to come out, maybe talk to your administration, even if you're like a district, right? Just to give information on the program. Or if let's say your district doesn't have high school organized teams, right? Because some don't. But if you have a bunch of gamers, I've had situations where I've had districts invite me to go basically do a tour of all their high schools and present for 30 minutes at each of them, and they organized it. That's another good way to do it. But that's kind of it's kind of hard right now. I mean, those websites are probably the best way to do it. We don't have anything major established. But honestly, you could probably ask Myself, who is in Michigan. I mean, they reach out to all the college coaches all the time for advice. And the best way is just to work directly with them, get an email, get a message us on Twitter, whatever it is. I mean, I don't think any college coach has ever said no to helping a high school program, at least that I'm aware of right now. We all want to help it. We all understand that's an important ecosystem for us to grow.
Good point.
Yeah,
Sean?
I don't think – sorry.
We'll go Josh first. No, that's perfect.
I don't think there is this weird thing where they need to try to get on our radars or get our attention. Obviously, we're all recruiting programs at different skill levels. Many of us have JV teams or academy teams or multiple different tiers. Just reach out to us, just send us an email. I think that's the best. Work with us directly is the way for sure. Your students can sign up on NCSA or Be Recruited or anything like that. But they're more likely to get in contact with us, and we're more likely to help you with your program. And you can just reach out to us and just like Cody said. I don't think any college director has ever said no. I'm not interested in helping this local high school.
I think too, one thing, I don't know if I missed part of the question or what, but if you're just trying to get your students noticed, have them look for schools that they like. And most schools, I think most programs will have some sort of form on their website where you just apply, right? Like for the last 3 years, up until spring or up until about December, honestly, most of our players that we recruited were just like passive recruiting. They came to us and then we recruited them. You know what I mean? So we weren't often going out to find students to get noticed and that kind of thing. Now that we are, there's a few tools like the websites mentioned, that kind of thing, but I'd say somebody mentioned Twitter here. Like that's really where a lot of the recruiting is happening now, is Twitter. So make sure your players understand how to be a digital citizen. Start that Twitter account, keep it clean. Make sure it's easy to get a hold of them and for them to kind of promote themselves. They've got to build up their brand. Like Chris mentioned, just go look at whoever Cody follows, and then you can just reach out to all those kids. It's generally a good idea. We just realized that yesterday.
The secret's out. I'll find some random, like, super deep somewhere, some high school kid that I swear no one's going to know about. Find him on Twitter, and the only person following him is Cody. Like,
exactly. That's how we figured it out yesterday. That's how we figured it out. Like, we're like talking to some kid. Let's go look at his profile. Oh, of course, Cody already follows him.
He's gonna have to switch up his stuff. You just put it out. I'm
gonna have to make
a secret account, just
second Twitter account.
That's funny. We're kind of approaching time, so I want to give everyone one last option to give their plug of where people can contact you if they have questions, or to follow you and your amazing hot Twitter takes if that's your jam. So we'll give everyone one last opportunity to do that. We'll start with Cody.
I'm sorry, you cut out when you said that.
Oh, did I? We'll start with you, Cody. We'll give everyone an opportunity to just say where people can follow them or reach out with questions.
So again, my name's Cody Elson, and my email is my last name Elson, so ELSENC at northwood.edu. I check that all the time, and then my Twitter is just at Evolve, spelled correctly, and then Discord is Evolve, #0001. So pretty simple, that too.
Cool. Sean?
Yeah, I just threw mine in the chat there. I'm not going to give you my email because I hate email, but my Twitter is at the Esports Prof, and my Discord is there. Just my name, Sean Burney, #4918.
Awesome. And Josh?
Yeah, I just posted it in the chat, but joshua.buchanan at alvernia.edu. Twitter or Discord are better. Twitter is at early toss, and then Discord is early #8193.
Nice. And I'm Adam Antor. I put my Discord in there. My Twitter is at Coach Antor if you want all the Twitter hot takes. I ain't afraid of putting them out there. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. It was a pleasure. This was a fun panel. I wish we could keep going, but we got to go listen about the NACE partnership. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Everyone who participated on the panel, thank you. Anyone who put in questions, appreciate it. And have a great rest of the convention, and we will talk to you later.